Hey, book babes, I'm Aubrey.
And I'm Peyton.
And today we are reviewing the latest Emily Henry book, Great Big Beautiful Life, BBL.
Yeah, so just with a cup of coffee as we dive between these paper sheets.
Let's do it.
Alrighty, welcome back everybody to the Hardcover podcast. It is May, and so that means it's M-Hem season.
Yes.
Every May, it's like, I know I'm going to be reading an Emily Henry book in May/June, and it's like every year I clock it. And I honestly,
Yes.
I think that's so cool that she does that. Like she
It's like-
follows that pattern.
Perfect. Here's your summer reading, girlies.
Yep. And so it gets us out of like our winter fantasy. You know, at this point we're kind of like in a slump of some kind. And then the Emily Henry just is like romance, love, bright covers. So we're excited.
Yes, for this novel, we are following Alice Scott, a celebrity journalist who has hunted down the famous Margaret Ives to write her life story. However, a wrench is thrown into things when not only does she learn she's competing for the job against Pulitzer Prize winner Hayden Anderson, but as the month-long trial interviews begin, she realizes Margaret is definitely keeping something from her.
Yeah, this is unlike any other. Well, I think Emily Henry did something completely different in this book. If you have not read this book yet, because we are in a no spoiler section right now, you do not have to worry about us spoiling anything. As we'll let you know when we cross into our spoiler section. It's just so different. If you think you're going into your typical romance summer setting M-Hem book, this is not it in the way that it usually is.
Yeah, I like to call it Emily Henry cosplaying as TJR for the summer. Like, I think you texted me and you were like, I have to keep reminding myself that this isn't a Taylor Jenkins Reid's book.
Yeah, it was honestly, it got in the way of my reading because it was just like, it was screaming Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo covered in a different story. And I was trying to give it that a grain of salt. But also, I was starting to feel like, yeah, but don't you realize this plot is already a very popular book, and it felt icky. Now, Emily Henry still made it her own in the way that I'm not like, oh, don't read this book. She literally copied TJR.
It's not this setup.
People are allowed to have a right, and in Emily Henry's books, her characters most of the time are writers or in books somehow. So this plot line makes sense, and there's a love plot also, which then makes it, she like made it her own. So I'm okay with it, but definitely I'm like, this is TJR. This is TJ. I'm like, no, it's not. It's Emily Henry.
Which is interesting. I guess the talk by the people in like traditionally publishing, marketing this book are not going to be saying that, but I haven't seen anyone else saying that, which is wild because it's screaming off the page to us. But what I did see was heavily marketed is that this is Emily Henry's women's fiction. This is Emily Henry's step into a more literary sphere. This is Emily Henry like drifting further away from romance. And so I first want to say this is definitely still a romance book.
Yeah.
Like there's no like, people are like, this should be shoved in women's. No, it shouldn't. No, it shouldn't.
It's romance. It's romance.
We still have sex scenes. We still like, I feel like enough of the narrative is still focused solely on the coming together of these two characters. But I will say I was so surprised. Women's fiction is one thing, like to say that because we are following Margaret Ivy's story just as much as we're following Alice's in a way, even though Alice is our only point of view character, I get the comparisons to that. But, and I don't know if you saw this, Reese Witherspoon's book club, they chose this book as their May book, okay? And they, like in a teaser video for that, it was like a little skit between Reese and Emily. And Reese called it a mystery.
Okay, so that's great that you mentioned that because when I was going into this book, I must have seen that video with Emily Henry, and I was like, this is not giving mystery. This is not giving.
No.
I was like, yes, we're solving, but it was more of like, okay, bitch, get out the story so I can write. Like she was there was no like mystery really happening. And
No.
no, I saw that video and I was like, this is not a mystery.
Not at all. And Emily Henry's like, shh, we're not supposed to tell people that yet. Like, no, we're not supposed to tell that at all.
I
Because
mean,
it's
it definitely
not.
set me up to know that this wasn't a typical Emily Henry book.
Yeah.
But then I also was like, all right, this feels very Seven Husbands to me.
Mhm.
Let's bring in this completely different mystery plot that I had no idea about and was not anywhere close to TJR. And it
Right.
just never came. And I was like, okay.
Like the first third of this, when Hayden and Alice, they both start doing their interviews, and this isn't a spoiler, they both come to this conclusion. They're like, hey, something's up with Margaret. Like there's something deeper going on here. I was like, this is the start of the mystery plot. They're going to start working together. They're going to assemble clues. There's going to be like some type of action scene. We're going to find a dead body. Like
Yeah.
I'm expecting mystery with a capital M, like trademarked at the end. And that's just not what this was at all. Like there was a plot twist, but that doesn't make it a mystery.
Yeah, and it wasn't even like that plot twist because like I saw it from 1,000 miles away. So yeah, if you saw that video, this is there's mystery elements to it, but it is not a mystery by any means, like at all. But yeah, so let's get that aside, which
Tone
definitely
aside,
is the tone and marketing played a huge role in it for me.
And I think it helped. I think going into it, knowing that it wasn't going to be strictly romance did help shape my expectations, because if I didn't know that, the fact that it is her least romantic book, like that might have turned me off if I hadn't gone in with the proper mindset.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's transition into some of the plot and storytelling elements of this book. Like our center is writing this book, and then the fact that like Alice and Hayden are competing for this job together. What did you think?
Yeah, so the way that this is set up, and I actually really appreciated, which was confusing at first because I was listening to most of this book, but similar to Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, if you read that, it goes back and forth in time periods. So when they're doing the interviews, and we're in Alice's POV, of course. So when Margaret is telling Alice her story, we are actually like in that time, which is really helpful, and it's more intuitive. Like it felt more like immersive. Yeah, like it was a more immersive experience, and so it helps you get into like the non-romance parts of the book. So I really appreciated that, and then also just there's so many characters in this book, so I think the plotting really helped with that. Also, there's two plot lines also, kind of. So we have the like journalistic like writing competition, and then we have Alice, her family's plot line, and romance with Hayden. So you're kind of in between the two all the time, and they never really cross over, and so you kind of feel like you're living in two different worlds. I mean, I think maybe that's the point because Alice kind of felt that way, that she was living this double life. And so that uncomfortableness, I feel like, is warranted for this book, but it was definitely something I noticed in the plotting.
Yeah, it's one of my critiques. And I hear what you're saying. I liked the feeling of it being split, and that worked for me for the first 200 pages.
I agree.
When it's a 400-page book, I wanted more conflict between Hayden and Alice. And I feel like right in the beginning, Hayden's like, I'm going to set this boundary. We're not going to talk about Margaret when we're together. And she said, yep, I understand that. And then they didn't. And then it was almost entirely conflict free, their entire relationship, besides the like, we can't go too far because like there was an impending doom of the idea of eventually one of them's going to get this job, and what's that going to do to their relationship. And that was fun and flirty for the first 200 pages. And then I needed something more to happen, and I feel like it didn't until the last 3 chapters.
Yeah, they didn't really Scooby-Doo it where they're like, we're going to break all the rules now. Like fuck the NDA there and, move forward. But so to keep it non-spoiler, because we will get
Yes,
ahead of
we'll leave
ourselves.
there. I will say I feel like Emily Henry in all of her books does a little bit. And for Happy Place, the bit was at the beginning of each chapter, she would take a paragraph or two to just describe the setting because it's called Happy Place and that's like the place. And that turned me off for a minute. But the bit in this one it was wrestling with the ideas of what is truth and what is a true side of a story. There's a quote that's repeated a lot that I don't know if Alice quotes it from someone else, and I don't know if that someone else is a real person. It sounds like it should be, and I took journalism classes, so I feel like I should know it, but I don't. But the quote is like, there's 3 versions of a story: mine, theirs, and the truth.
Mhm.
And so what I liked is all the times that we were kind of flashing back into like the House of Ivy's story, it would always start with like the story in the news, and then it would be like a sentence or two, and then it was like their version and now my version, and then we'd go into the chapter. And I thought that was fun. Even if
Yeah, I thought it was too. And it also felt very Taylor coded as well because I know I'm like Henry's a big Taylor fan. I'm like, oh, every time I was listening to it, I'd hear like my version. I'm like, oh, damn, okay.
Oh, Alice's the Ivy's version.
Yeah.
All right, going into these characters here, I was made so uncomfortable by Alice sometimes. Alice is not like me in every way. Like, she is the definition of like a golden retriever extrovert. And sometimes she'd just be having these conversations with strangers. I remember once in the very beginning, she's in a town where she doesn't really know anyone, and she's going out to dinner, and she's like, let me sit at the bar so I can talk to these people. And then
Yeah.
like the people leave, and she's like sitting there so sad. And I was like, girl, I can never imagine like walking into a bar and being like, I hope I meet a stranger to like, not like romantically. She's trying to sit at the bar specifically so she can talk to strangers. And that's like, I feel like very realistic for extroverts, but her extrovert-ism started like, ugh, I was like, stop it.
Yeah, it could not be me. It is interesting for me because if you've watched any of our past Emily Henry reviews,
Yeah.
it is very clear that I hate the names she chooses for her main characters. And this book, which I'm going to get to in a second, didn't necessarily hit as hard as Happy Place and Funny Story did for me, but I loved the character names. So maybe just keep the horrible, like, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry if your name is of the names of, I don't know, it didn't flow for me in the other books.
Harriet.
Yeah.
Like Harriet Tubman. That's actually who I pictured the whole time.
Yeah, like Harriet, just like, I just was thinking of historical characters and not of like a 20 or a 30-something-year-old woman.
Yeah.
So that was interesting for me with the characters. I'm like, love these names, but also like I just never, I don't know, they weren't really self-insert characters, I guess. Which you want in your romance stories.
Yeah. That's fair. All right, let's move into our star ratings here. You just said that this wasn't your favorite. What'd you give it?
For me, I think this is going to fall around a 3.54. I really loved, it's hard to rank an Emily Henry book below 4 stars just because her writing is so immersive and it doesn't matter if it's bad or good. You're still like the way she writes characters is just so intriguing. So I'm gonna land around that 3.54, but definitely a lower 4.
That's kind of where I hit too. I really enjoyed every time I was reading, but every time I put it down, like I was good. Like I didn't need to pick it back up.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's the difference between like a good book and a great book is I wasn't craving finishing the story. Like I literally last night was like, oh, we're doing the podcast tomorrow. Let me sit down and listen to the rest of this because I need to knock her out.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's exactly how I felt. Whereas Funny Story, even though I like Happy Place more than Funny Story was like, oh no, I need to read this. I'm not waiting for book club because our book club read that book when I'm like, I need to read it now. And the once I started it, it was over. I read it so fast. So yeah, unfortunately, just kind of where the cookie crumbled with this one. But
yeah. Though I do think I liked this one more than Happy Place, which I know you're not gonna love
Mm.
to hear. But I think Happy Place was also one of my first introductions to contemporary romance because I was so strictly a fantasy girly that, like, it had its own curve that was a me problem and not the book's problem.
Right.
Whereas this one, I knew what I loved having strong expectations going in, and I think that really helped shape it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my first
So
Emily Henry book is Book Lovers, and I don't like that book. So, other like it's like one of my cousins. She's like, it's my favorite book. I'm like, really? So,
Yeah.
I just think, and I think I was in the same boat as you, but
Yeah. Let's real quick before we jump into our spoiler section, rapid fire rank. We've read 4 Emily Henry books. Where do they land for you?
great question.
I
Let's see. Wait, you said 4? We've read 4?
believe so, unless you've done an extra one for me, because
No,
it's these
I'm just
3
counting.
and book lovers.
Yep. So, I'd put Book Lovers on the bottom. Uh, Great Big Beautiful Life next.
Mhm.
Funny Story, Happy Place.
Yeah.
So,
I
Happy Place, Funny Story, Great Big Beautiful Life, Book Lovers.
I would do funny story, book lovers, great big beautiful life, happy place. But that means it's good books. If we can have like
All
such
that switching.
introverty,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and our tastes are fairly similar, so
Yeah.
all right, now we are going to jump into our spoiler section. If you haven't read the book yet, this is a great time to like and subscribe and then leave and come back later once you've finished it because we are going to be talking about that twist at the end of the book. Okay, this is unusual. Usually, when we do our book reviews and we enter into our spoiler section, we will start at the beginning of the book and kind of meander our way down to the end. However, when I was creating the outline for today's episode, I was like, I feel like the twist at the end of the book made the rest of the book better
Yes.
and changed how I viewed certain plot points and pacing. And I mean, we did just do a rant last episode about how like it needs to be good to get you to the end of the book. And so like it should the other part of the story should carry its own weight. But I think looking back, and if I was a rereader, I think this would be a great one to do. So I wanted to kick us off here talking about the twist at the end of the book. That way we can carry that into the rest of our conversation. So
Yes, I think that is such a good idea because then I'm just gonna be dancing around it the whole time.
yes.
Let's just
Yeah.
address the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
The minute I found
Okay.
out that Hayden was like kind of like assigned here, like
Yeah.
he didn't look for this.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, he's related somehow. Like he just is.
Wow.
So it made the book kind of a wash for me. I was not surprised by the relation
Okay.
at all. And no, I was like, there's no way.
Yeah.
My one thing was, is he lying to Alice and he knows this, or does he not know?
Oh,
And I was
consider.
praying the whole time that he just didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm happy to find out that he just didn't know because I thought that was going to be the third act breakup
I
in the book.
see.
That
Yeah.
she finds out that he knows and she's like, why am I here then?
That's so interesting. I didn't have a clue.
I wish I didn't. This book would have been
I
so much better for me.
Yeah, truly. I now was I jaw on the floor shocked when it was revealed? No. But it was a very happy, satisfying reveal and I got it to be a reveal. So that sucks for you.
It does. Well,
I
actually,
did.
I was freaking out because
Yeah.
in the book, when we find out she was having a miscarriage and all of
Mhm.
that, I was like, oh, this doesn't make sense then. Like my whole theory and like what I've been writing on this whole book, like what's gonna, and then we just find out she was lying. But
Well, no, she had a miscarriage and then later is
oh
when
yes,
she had Nicolette.
yep,
I figured there was going to be something about a child because we focused heavily on the first third about like Ruth, who was like or LP, the little princess, who was her grandfather's secret child that they posed as niece. And so I figured that was where this was going in some way, but I didn't like think that it would come to Hayden. I really thought that Hayden was there. I thought that Margaret decided that it was time for some external reason, like maybe she's dying, like Alice had thought, and brought Alice because Alice was earnest, but was like, but we probably should have like the star power of Hayden. And I thought the conclusion was going to be them writing the book together, which it kind of was. Then it did
I
become
will
that.
say I thought they were gonna co-write the book together, and
Yeah.
like they were gonna go to Margaret and be like, dude, we're gonna do it together. And she's
Yeah.
like, yes, I can't pick.
What you were saying with the Scooby Doo, I was so certain that they were each getting half of the story and they were going to come together and share notes to make the whole
Oh,
story and then come with that and be like, well, he has these pros and she has these pros and together we can create this. That's not what happened, but I did really like what did happen. And I loved the third act breakup being this fact that Alice now knows knowledge and facts about Hayden that she cannot legally share. And that being like this awkward situation of like, there's nowhere to go with this relationship from here. Like, I know your grandma is Margaret and I can't share that and I cannot be with you because of that. Like that is such a juicy third act breakup.
yeah, and then she just ghost the man.
Oh, then I lose interest.
Yeah.
Listen, I have it and I had it later, but I'll talk about it right now. Emily Henry is addicted to putting weird time jumps in the last
Oh,
4 chapters of
yes.
her book.
Like, where are we?
It happened in Great Big Beautiful Life, it happened in Funny Story, and it happened in Happy Place, and no, it even happened in Funny Story. I mean, in Book Lovers. I think in every single one of her books, the characters like we build up to the third act breakup, and then the character spends months apart working on themselves before getting back together, and I don't like it.
And then it's just a chapter of we got back
We got
together
back
and now we
together.
have this house, or oh, now
Yeah,
we all are a big happy family. It's like, no, I want to see the process of getting back together. That's the
yeah.
whole point.
Like, and it doesn't make sense for, especially in this situation, like, why did she have to spend months away? She could have spent 1 week working on her stuff with her mom, write that letter, and Margaret had like done the stuff. Like, there was no reason for it to be months. And this is usually the flip of my critique. I'm usually like, guys, make the book take a little longer in terms of time. It just
Uh-huh.
makes it more believable. But in this situation, I just don't know why it's always after the third act breakup and before they get together.
Yeah, and it is such an Emily Henry thing, and because in a romance book, it's a little bit different in the way that they fell so fast,
Yeah.
and then like they were apart longer than they were together, and so you just start to be like, well, this like isn't really believable. I don't know. So
Mhm.
yeah, Hayden's mom is the child of
Mhm.
Margaret,
And
and
Cosmo
we
Sinclair.
yeah, we kind of we come to find out like the passing of Cosmo was
Mhm.
so stressful for her that they were like, the baby needs to go.
Well, yeah, I feel like her and Cosmo together had been like for so long. How can you raise a baby in these circumstances? And so then when the circumstances literally lead to the death of her husband, she's like, no, I got to protect the baby. And I loved how it was kind of tragic that, like, through Hayden's POV, we saw all this time of him being like, yeah, I just don't think my mom was built for the spotlight because she ended up being in a lesser, but still in the spotlight as the mayor's wife, which
Yeah.
was a really sad little tie in there.
Mhm. You know, I thought that was interesting too that she like couldn't escape it, but then you could also see that like she was being protected, but there was only so
Mhm.
much protecting Margaret could do. And
Yeah.
so even on like the small end of like a mayor's wife, it's like, no, she was never meant for this. So if maybe Margaret
Mhm.
did make the right decision of imagine if this was scaled to the level that Margaret and Cosmo were, this is
Right.
like like, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings me into the next talking point, which is the theme in this book of generational trauma and legacy. Because when Alice sits down to do her interviews, Margaret's like, to hear my story, we have to start with my great grandfather, Lawrence Richard Ives. And we go through his whole story, and then Gerald, her grandfather's story, and then Freddie, her father's story to her, but we even spend time like with her mom, with her sister, and then through Hayden we get her child, even though we don't know it at the time, and kind of how like things keep repeating themselves in this like curse of the Ivies.
Yeah, so in this, it was interesting that it was a woman that had to do it, but Margaret basically decided in that moment that this Ives family curse, she was going to stop the cycle because everyone has been affected by it. And so
Mhm.
to give up your daughter to, for a better life because there
Yeah.
was no, I mean, it makes sense why she was a grouchy old lady. Did you think that oh what's her face? Ida, Rita, I don't know, the
Oh,
her what
Jody.
Jody. Did
Yeah.
you think that that was going to be I don't know how old I couldn't put an age to Jody. Like,
Yeah, I don't think we were supposed to, if that was the daughter.
yeah.
I By the time I thought it could be the daughter, we had already revealed that it was the niece.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess Alice told us that there was something suspicious going on. I was hoping for a girlfriend. So,
Yeah, yeah, of course. You're like, "Please." I know. I was like, "Oh, then she fell in love
yeah, like
with
how do you
Jody."
get over Cosmo Sinclair, like this
A woman.
famous, yeah, a woman. Vibe shift, okay?
Yes. So I was not really interested in her family's history the whole time. I was like, let's go. Okay, whatever. There's trauma, whatever. What's your story? I think that may be me just wanting to get to the bottom of like the mystery.
Mhm.
So from that aspect, I can see where I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever, cool. Stop. What's your story? So for a
Yeah,
while there, I was tuned out. I was like, I don't need this information.
I was paying attention and I think that it was done well. However, I also so in it, I was like, this is kind of boring, but there's got to be clues in here. I
Oh,
was like, there's got
absolutely.
to be some type of point with this. And there was like the whole Ruth thing was the like signal, like was the foreshadowing for what then Margaret would then duplicate.
Yeah.
But other than that, there actually wasn't like you get to the end and you didn't actually need all of those people's stories to get what we got, or at least not in that length. And I feel like an excuse for it is that we now know Margaret never intended for there to be a book. She never
Mhm.
was actually giving Alice a shot. And so when Alice started asking her questions, she didn't want to talk about herself. So she made up this thing of being like, no, you have to hear about my great grandpa for 5 days.
Yeah.
You have to hear about my grandfather then for 4 more. Like, you know what I mean? But that means Margaret and Emily Henry made us sit through all of that
Yeah,
as well.
it helped, like, understanding the long form trauma and all of that, but it's
Yeah.
like, this newspaper, then he bought that newspaper. I'm like, "I don't care." But
Yeah, I just feel like Emily Henry could have made it connect back to the twist a little bit harder to make it feel a little bit more worthwhile. Because the
yeah,
biggest clue was the Nicolette, which we got in the very first section, the very first interview.
yep,
So then we set through or the book, which I think is my main thing, could have just been like 100 pages shorter.
yeah,
Could have been 100 pages shorter, hit all the same points, and just like made all the stories a little bit less. And that could have worked because I feel like the only like satisfying thing we got out of all of these backstories, besides the like painting the ideal of this House of Ivies, or House of Ives, is that quote at the end. And I tried to find it and then I couldn't because I had listened to it at that section. But at one point, Alice is like, I think fighting with Margaret. And she's like, no, like she was like the embodiment of like Lawrence's like greed and Gerald's whatever and Freddie's envy. Like it was like,
Mhm.
oh, I can see how the generational trauma has shaped Margaret,
Who
and
you
it
are,
painted a
yeah.
really clear picture for that one sentence.
Yeah. I was really we can just because we're still talking about this family because I want to
Yeah.
get to the romance, but let's jump down
Mhm.
to the two main side stories since we're talking about all of them.
Yes.
Um, the Laura and the
Mhm.
doctor cult thing, I
Yes.
was like fucking locked into that. I was like, whoa, I was so locked in because of like from when they first saw Cosmo when they had like their wigs on at the thing and
Yeah.
everyone got trampled
Mhm.
and that was crazy to me, and
Yeah.
then her being like, "Yeah, I like Cosmo," and Laura's like, "Fuck you, like, what the heck?" Just like the sister that whole,
Mhm.
like,
Yeah,
sister
that
bonding
dynamic.
thing. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, but yeah, there were a little too many side stories. Oh, absolutely, like, I couldn't even really tell you the full summation of all of these, but I can say and maybe, like, you that's maybe just because that was my favorite side
Yeah.
story, even though it was horrible. But I really thought she was gonna come back lobotomized. She basically was,
Oh,
but I was like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, this is the time period like they are going to lobotomize her, blah blah blah, and
It was a
she
lot. So,
yeah.
going through this list that I've written for Peyton and I, we have as our, like, side plots included in this book, side stories, we have Laura and the doctor cult situation, Alice and her mother's, like, relationship, the friends from the scratch, and then at the end, they, like, came and visited her
Oh yeah. Mhm.
during, like, the breakup period, Theo, which was her side piece, Jody, and that's the maid who then plays a part and, like, where does she fit in with the family, and then all of the House of Ivy's backstories, which if you count for each, like, man, that
There's a
you
lot.
know what I mean? Like, we're filling up my fingers with plots that are in addition to the main romance, because it's
Yeah.
supposed to be a romance book,
Yep.
and then even the memoir.
And then yeah, we're dealing with a family tree, and so like in my head, I try to categorize it as like there's like the romance, and then
Mhm.
there's the Margaret, and then
Yeah.
there's the Alice with her mom and like daddy problems,
Yeah.
and they all do bleed into one another.
Uh-huh.
It's just at times when you're also adding in like I don't like Theo should have been excommunicated from the story to begin with. Like
He didn't need to be there.
he didn't need to be there.
No.
I understand she was trying to be like, well, I have people too, or like I've never really had someone who's like really loved me because of like we could go into the psychology of
Mhm.
like not having her dad around and like all of
Yeah.
that, and her mom kind of being very passive towards her. But yeah, like there are just things we just did not need in this story because it just like I looked at Theo and I was like, I don't know who that is. If you would have said, oh, her side piece, I'm like, oh yeah, that guy. Okay, cool.
Yes. Yeah, and that my thing is that the promise of this book, especially when we say okay, besides the romance, the promise of the book is this idea of interviewing Margaret Ives, of this idea of her like oh my god, I don't know how to say that word.
Tumultuous.
Tumultuous
Yeah.
of like love relationship with Cosmo Sinclair, and like this idea of like there's the tabloid stories and then what lurks beneath there deeper. That
Yeah.
kind of is the premise of Evelyn Hugo. Evelyn, yes,
Yeah.
Hugo.
Yeah, Hugo, yep.
Um,
So many
Seven
names.
Husbands. Yes, that's the premise of TJR is Seven Husbands. But in that, like, there's this idea of like there's something deeper hidden in the truth, and I don't think we got that in this book. I
And
felt
I
like
think
this
because we've read
yeah,
Seven Husbands, we were looking for it.
I agree.
Without like subconsciously, I was looking for it and I was like, it was like my brain was like stalling out. It's like, it's not
Mhm.
here, it's not here, it's not here.
Yeah. Like, the truth was less interesting than the tabloids, and I understand that that might be realistic,
Yeah.
but is that necessarily interesting? Like, I feel like the whole book we're dangling this idea of, like, once Margaret starts talking about her and Cosmo, like, jaw's gonna be on the floor. Like, Margaret is trying hard to keep this secret, and that got dangled in front of our face. They're like, "You have to sit through granddaddy's backstory because we've got something great for you. And then it turned out that there wasn't anything great at the end of the tunnel. It was just Margaret trying to deflect away from herself because she didn't want Alice finding out who Hayden was to her. And that's even like
It's
the
just
Laura and the
frustrating.
doctor, that's so, like, I agree. That's so juicy. But I feel like we spent, what, one chapter on that? Like, I feel like I knew nothing about that ahead of time. We got the chapter where it's like, what the fuck? That's crazy. And then we moved on.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, oh, and then Laura and like Margaret were separate for a little bit. Like, I don't know. I just feel like there was a lot of juicy stuff tagged in the last 100 pages that we then sped through to get to the twist.
And the happily ever after too.
Well,
Yeah.
and like we could have just knocked out Theo. We could have knocked out the friends from the scratch.
Yeah.
Like, we could have knocked out the 4 months of breakup time between Alice finding out the truth and Hayden showing up on her doorstep. We could have knocked out Lawrence Richard Ivies and just started with Gerald, who plays an impact on Margaret in her life because of Laura, her sister's relationship to him.
Yep. And just mention, we don't need a whole chapter dedicated to it. Yeah, no, I definitely felt like it was, I mean, maybe it was the purpose too, because at the end of the book, Alice is like, I've done all of this and given you all of this, my time for this. And maybe we needed to be like, we gave you all our time for this. Like, you know, so, but at the end of the day, it wasn't as satisfying as, you know, like Seven Husbands was. So yeah, it was, the promises were confusing in my head.
Yeah.
Now moving backwards here to the romance, because it's an Emily Henry book.
We gotta talk about it.
Yeah. All right. So I thought we were going to get a lot more rivals.
Oh, okay.
In
Yeah.
this book to lovers, but it was more like rivals for 3 chapters to lovers for the whole book. And I mean, there was like the tension of like, oh my gosh, like they're next to each other in hotel rooms. And then she's like, I got a house. And then you're like, oh, now they're further apart and like seeing at the bar. And like, I really liked that cat and mouse, but like they totally liked each other. But the whole NDA situation and then them competing against each other. What Emily Henry was able to do in this book is have this like basically legal binding thing that builds tension. And it was like, I think it was so smart that they signed separate NDAs too, because it's like, wow, like we want to know what's going on in his head, but we literally can't.
Yeah.
And so now, you know, we want what we can't have. And so now I want Hayden.
Yeah, I liked so much of what was there, but I feel like the big hitters of their relationship happened in like the first 100 and the last 100.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that.
And there was a lot of
we were balancing all these other side stories on top of a romance story, so it makes sense.
Like they had that whole fight over leaving the mom's house where he's like, well, why don't you tell her what upsets you? And she's just like, I don't want to. And then they don't speak to each other for a week. And like, that was unnecessary. I don't think that gave us anything. Then they had like, Hayden literally is like, I love you, but don't say it back.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really liked even the part in the beginning. I loved them going on. I think my favorite part was when they started going on their little diner dates.
Yeah.
And they were testing out the different spots and sitting in the booths. And she's like giving him food that's like not healthy because he wants to eat all this healthy, like perfectionist stuff. And then they finally kiss after like the birthday party that they go to for like 5 seconds. And she's like, come back to my place, which as we all would. We all would.
I was like, this is real.
Yeah. And that was perfect to have that kiss so early in the book and him to be like, no, we're coworkers. We need to just be friends.
And it kept the tension then.
It kept the tension. But I think, again, there was just 100 pages too much where we started to lose that tension. Like at one point, it's like, okay, if you're eating her out, I think you can just have sex.
Yeah. Oh,
Like,
I know.
I think you're together now.
And the only reason they weren't having sex is because
Yeah.
he's like, "You're gonna leave me after this." And
Yeah.
she's like, "I'm literally not." He's like, "I don't believe you." It's like, "Okay, that's why you're not," but like whatever.
Mhm.
I loved the when he showed up the one day or whatever, and she had his like green drink for him. Like she remembered
Yeah.
that he didn't like drink coffee.
Mhm.
And I love that. I mean, of course, my favorite is the hurricane
Okay,
wet.
yes.
I mean,
Uh-huh.
when the power went out and it was raining, I'm like, he is gonna
It's
knock any minute. And
fine.
then when he knocked, I'm like, please don't be that like old man. I was like, God, please don't. And so I was like, yes, this is what we wanted. Thank you, Emily Henry. Thank you.
Yeah, that was good. And so romantic. Like, yeah, throwing a hurricane. I like that.
Yeah, it was randomly. They're like, oh my God, because they're on this island, which I always forgot, by the way. I always
Oh,
forgot they were on
yeah.
this, like, where no one knew Alice. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I mean, I don't know what the old man's name is. Something with a
Yeah,
C.
whatever.
But like I was like, he knows something. I was like, he knows something. And like, so I loved all of that.
Mhm.
The moral of the story here with this book is, and I love the happily ever after, it all worked out. The thing I loved how she didn't get to do the Alice story, but she reclaimed her own story. And she was like,
Yeah.
I don't care if no one's gonna read this. That was her therapy of I'm gonna take ownership of like my story.
Mhm.
Kind of like she was empowering Margaret to do. That's what I meant to say. Margaret to do and hers. And she was able to bond with her mom and all that. I don't think she needed to bond with her mom for 4 months. And also like how are you making money? Like I just
Yeah.
there's like so many like logistics in my
Like,
head
don't
where
you
I'm
have
like,
college loans to pay?
yeah. That
Well,
I
I
was
guess
like,
she
huh?
did say she wrote, like, remote stories for the Scratch,
Yeah,
but
I was like, no, whatever. That the summation of all of this is that there's
Mhm.
just so much going on. My brain can't conceptualize it. And so I
Yeah.
just think if we would have toned it back a little bit, I would be like, oh, this moment and this moment. And then that was it. Now I'm like, I feel
Mhm.
like I need to talk about all of these things. This book is just
Yeah.
one ADHD like person's
Mhm.
head.
And this isn't a 800-page fantasy book where you deserve all of those plot points.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why I think there's a lot of good and there's some
I
bad. And I
agree.
think that's what makes this a 3.5, 4-star read for us. I think
Mhm.
Emily Henry can't bomb a book. I don't think it's
No.
possible. I just don't think it is.
Yeah.
But it definitely, like, I'm going to call out those moments where I'm like, one, I don't give a shit about this, or like, I'm confused because we're in everyone's storyline and now I don't know whose is whose.
Yeah, I think my final thing with the HEA, the happily ever after, is, and I think I like it. I know that it gets hated on a lot, which is the inclusion of a pregnancy at the end of the book, where it's like, oh, how else can you wrap up a heterosexual couple's
Yeah,
relationship is to
pregnancy.
like give them a baby at the end. But I think because we had such strong themes of this like generational stuff, and Hayden is a part of the generation, them having a daughter and naming it Laura, which is the name of Margaret's sister, the baby's like great aunt or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I thought that was so sweet. I thought that
Oh
was
yeah.
perfect.
Oh, I remember thinking like, oh, of course she's pregnant because we did a whole other time jump again. But I'm like, wait, no, this is so fitting because like these babies had such a theme in this book, and
Mhm.
Hayden being of the Ives
Line.
line, this is like, oh, all right, this, and so I thought it was perfect. I think if we would have ended without that like cherry on top
Hmm.
of like we've broken the curse.
Yes, like if the
And
curse
Margaret's
didn't
still
break
in their
with Nicolette,
lives.
it broke with her.
Yeah, it broke with her, and that also like Margaret still is gets to see her, I guess would be like great granddaughter.
Yeah.
Um so anyways, I really liked this book.
Hmm.
Um it was a lot to talk about, which I was not expecting this in the Emily Henry book, but here we are. It's great big. It is big and it's a pretty
It
great
is
story.
big. Oh, I never looked at the art of the people on here.
Yeah, I love her covers. They're great. So, anyways, if you guys liked this or us reading these types of books, please let us know. We will continue jumping into other genres. We mainly read fantasy, but we love jumping into other authors' works.
Yes. Oh, fun fact for the end of this video,
Ooh,
because we talked about us being fantasy nerds. I just learned this recently. I don't know if you know this, Peyton. Emily Henry originally wrote a fantasy book, queried it, and no one picked it up. And so she shifted into the romance genre. But the first book she wrote, there is an unpublished manuscript of an Emily Henry fantasy book that I need to get my hands on. I want
no
to read it.
way.
Self-publish it, Emily.
I
I'll
think
read it.
at this point she's grown and is like one of the most popular authors
Yeah.
ever. That if she was like, "Here's a fantasy book," I think everyone would be like, "Sweet."
Yeah,
I
just
think
like Ellie Hazelwood did.
yeah, I don't think she can go wrong. She
Mhm.
could release a nonfiction book and people would be like, "Sweet, a new Emily
Sweet.
Henry book's out," and we'll probably read it too.
Yeah, so maybe this was her shift into mystery women's fiction,
She's
because
leading us down. It's a
next is
breadcrumb.
an even bigger jump, and we are getting dragons in our Emily Henry book. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and happy reading.